Okay, good morning, everyone. How you guys doing? You guys all hear me okay? Hello, hello. All right. Okay, so for today, we're going to go over, talk a little bit more about project 2. I'll show you some student samples and we'll kind of go over that whole process to make sure you guys are clear on that. So just a note, for next week, there will be no live meeting. So no live Zoom next class. I'll send this all in the email just to remind you. But rather than having class next Wednesday, what we're going to be doing is having a critique of your thumbnails for project 2. So what you'll do is basically just start working on your thumbnails, start developing sketches that you can eventually take to your final art. So you'll post that to the discussion, just how we've been doing with the other drawing challenges. I'll have you kind of answer a few questions about your drawing so far, and I will then make suggestions on your work about which ones to take to the final art. So just be aware of that. I'll have that kind of summarized in an email as well. I think I'll send that out tomorrow so you guys can get started on working on that. Have you guys looked ahead and started working on project 2? Have any questions come up as you guys have looked at that? All right. So for project 2, I'm just going to kind of summarize the different requirements for that and see if you guys have any questions. So all of these projects, all of them, I want to see your creative process. So you're not going to just turn into me final artwork. I want to see your ideas, your rough sketches, your final artwork, and have it all turned in together in a professional looking format. So first thing you're going to do are those thumbnails. So I believe you have 15 of those, right? Yep, 15 thumbnails. So all these things we've talked about so far, I want to see you start to think about in your thumbnails. So line variety, use of light and dark values, good use of shape. It can be abstract or representational, so it doesn't have to be one or the other. You can try both, would probably be my suggestion. And go for that. And these should all be in your sketchbook. Or some of you guys are drawing on Procreate, you can do that. But remember, if you're drawing on Procreate, just treat it like a digital sketchbook. Choose just one brush to draw with. I don't want to see a bunch of different effects and different types of brushes. So just choose one, like pen or pencil brush, and draw with that if you're doing it in Procreate. And then you will have, so you will take these 15 sketches or 15 thumbnails, however you have them. So you'll lay them out in your sketchbook. Each one should be about 2.5 inches on the longest side, plus or minus a little bit is okay. So you'll turn them all in. They'll all have hopefully a good focal point in it. You can't use exactly the ones from the drawing challenge we did last week, but you can use some of those for inspiration. And you'll turn those into the critique. Which will be done next week, as I mentioned. And I will make some suggestions and I'll say, okay, this one looks really good, this one looks really good, and that one looks really good. And then you can choose 2 of those to take to your final art. So you'll take these sketches, take it into Illustrator and start tracing over those with the pen tool to create a really good composition. that has clear focal point, use of shape, use of value, use of leading lines. Today we're going to talk about the rule of thirds, and we're going to talk about value contrast as well. So I want to see all these different things, all these different concepts we've been talking about in that final art. Okay, so it's kind of a chance for you to show me that you're understanding all these different concepts, and also show me that you know how to use Illustrator. So I'm going to expect you to know and be comfortable using doing the basics that were on the last project. And we will go from there. And so I want to see good use of Illustrator. One thing is the clipping mask. Has anyone watched the video for clipping mask yet? So that will be in the tutorials I'll send you guys around this week, but that's kind of a really nice way to frame your final artwork. Then there will be a short written reflection included in this. So that is just kind of talking about this process. So talking about, did you enjoy doing thumbnailing? What sort of mediums did you use? Was it easier to do abstract, easier to do representational? How was working digitally? Did your artwork change when it went from thumbnails to digital artwork? What part of the process did you enjoy most? What did you find challenging? Things like that. So I think this is just like 200 words. Basically a couple paragraphs. And then the biggest thing is it's all going to be turned in a PDF file. So that's how you're going to submit your work. Okay, one PDF file. Okay, and I have videos showing the process of going from thumbnail to final art. I have a video showing how to sketch thumbnails and a video of how to save as a PDF file. So if you guys don't know how to do any of these steps, make sure you pay close attention and watch those videos and kind of take notes as you go through the tutorials. Any questions on this part, on kind of the requirements for project 2? All right. Oops, let's go back to home. So one thing that will be very helpful for you guys, here's our Canvas class, is this file right here, project 2 template. So this is a template file that you use to display your artwork, and you will use this to save your work as a PDF. So I'm downloading it right now, project 02 template. I just downloaded it. When you open that up in Illustrator, it looks like this. It has a bunch of blank artboards, and you will then use this to display your work. Okay, so as you zoom in on each one of these pages, it has a little header here and then a title for what is on that page. So you will then come in and put your name here. Do not leave this as your name, using the type tool there. And you will drop your sketches here on the thumbnail page. So I have 2 pages for thumbnails. You may not need both of them, but you can use both of them. If you don't need both, you can delete that extra one. And here's where you will drop your final art. And here's where you will drop your second final art. And this is where you will put your reflection. Okay, so make sure you download this template and use this to display your work, because presenting it in a nice, professional, clean, organized manner is a big part of your grade on this project. Okay, and so this video here, here's a project demo video. I show you guys how to kind of trace over your artwork, how to use the pen tool, how to create those digital compositions. So make sure you watch this one, and also assembling it in the template. I show you guys how to take your work from different files and put it into the template file here. Okay. Okay, any questions on that process for project 2 or the critique that we'll be doing next week? So make sure you guys have practiced with the pen tool and done the pen tool files. Because we're going to be tracing a lot of complicated shapes here in Illustrator. So just hopefully you guys have done some of these basic worksheet exercises here, drawing straights and curves with the pen tool, because this is going to be a big part of the expectation that I want to see with your work is, can you confidently use the pen tool and use the different parts of the Illustrator program that we've gone over? Okay. And now let me just show you a few student examples of really good projects. Start. All right, so this is Megan Trejo. So here this is as a PDF file. So this is what your PDF file will look like. It will have 4 or 5 pages in it. So here are Megan's thumbnail sketches. So she was trying to do ones that had light and dark values, that had a good clear focal point, and made good use of silhouette shapes. So she has a really wide variety here. These are all representational, it looks like. Again, you can choose representational or abstract. She had more than 15, which is completely fine if you want to do more. Then here's the final artwork, okay? So here's one. Here's the second. Good, clear focal point here. Light and dark value on the focal point. Good silhouette shapes and just good use of the program here. So having some texture line downs here, good shapes, interesting straightened curves. I think this second one is better. This first one got just a little bit too dark, as you can see here, but this one is a little bit more clear. And then the written reflection there. This is Kayla's. So rough sketches. So yeah, these are all just in pencil in the sketchbook. And here's final art, focal point, leading lines, focal point, leading lines, thick lines, thin lines, light lines, dark lines, texture lines here in the sky, and then that written reflection. So all these ones I've saved, I'm pretty sure were A projects. So it kind of gives you an idea of what that looks like. So this one here, all the thumbnails fit on one artboard. So if you have a blank artboard, just delete that before you save it as a PDF. So that will knock you off just a couple points on the presentation, having a blank artboard. Here's a nice abstract piece, clear focal point, all these leading lines, different types of lines in there. Here's a more representational one as well. And there's the written reflection. Thumbnails, thumbnail, final art, final art. This one's cool, very busy. And written reflection. All right. We'll scroll through one more. So this one has some abstract options as well if you guys want to try that, especially if you're struggling with the drawing aspect of it. Okay. So any questions after seeing these? Seeing the other students' work? Okay, cool. So yeah, so we'll do that critique next week. I'll let you guys know in email, kind of just review that. But it will be much easier if you submit all your thumbnails to that critique. I have a chance to give you some good feedback. You can ask questions when you submit it and things like that. And I definitely encourage you guys to comment on each other's work as well. So look at what each other are doing, and you can borrow little ideas from each other. You're not going to steal someone's entire composition, but you can steal some small ideas and inspiration from looking at each other's work, hopefully. All right. So for today, we're going to be talking about the rule of thirds versus symmetrical compositions, and also some value contrast. Okay, has anyone ever used the rule of thirds before in any other art classes or photography classes, or heard of the rule of thirds? Yes, and more. Yeah, photography uses it a lot. Alice hasn't heard about it. Okay, cool. So basically what these are, symmetrical compositions or the rule of thirds composition, are just kind of guidelines to help you get a good composition. So it's really simple, or it's seemingly simple. It's a simple idea, but you can use it in a lot of different ways, and you can use it to get a really good variety of compositions and get really pleasing compositions as well. So when you're working on your thumbnails for this next project, I do want to see you put some of those guidelines on here to help you draw a symmetrical composition or a rule of thirds composition. So symmetrical composition, your guidelines will look like that. For rule of thirds, it looks like this. So I noticed when some of you guys did those, the barn and silo drawing challenge this last week, that some of you guys were doing symmetrical compositions or rule of third compositions. So that's a really good way to help you get a variety of different thumbnails. But this basically helps you place the focal point and then places everything around the focal point. So let's just start. Our focal point will be a very simple person for this first example. Okay, so there's our focal point. Okay. Since focal point, people are oftentimes the focal point. So symmetrical composition, you just put it right there in the middle. And one of these is not necessarily better, but oftentimes symmetrical can be a little static. It can be a little boring, and it lacks kind of the dynamic movement. But what it is, it's very organized. It's very clear. And it's kind of very easy to create as well. Okay, so that would you would just build off this composition, and as you build something else, you just kind of build it symmetrically, meaning you build both of the sides of the composition equally. Okay, so it's divided right down the middle of the composition, basically. And you don't have to have like both sides of it exactly the same. Like I could have something else over here as well, like a different sort of tree or bush on this side. But it's still basically symmetrical there. It feels weighted the same on each side of the composition. But for rule of thirds, it's saying wherever these lines intersect, that is a good place to put the focal point. So I could put my guy here, 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 or here. So kind of our natural tendency is always to do symmetrical. if you hand, a little kid a camera, they'll put the person or the focal point, whatever they're taking a picture of, right there in the middle. So rule of thirds allows us to break a lot of those rules and just come up with a different type of composition. So now I can build a little bit more interesting background around this person because I have all of this space over here to work with. And it kind of frees up the composition oftentimes and allows it to just come up with a lot of different possibilities. And as you're working on your thumbnails, using this rule of thirds, each thumbnail you come up with doesn't have to be dramatically different from another one. So I can use the same, basically all the same elements, a person, the sun, a bush, and a tree, and I can just do a different version. Maybe I put the guy down here. How does this change the composition? Well, now this allows me to have a lot more space for background when I do this. So just playing around and moving these different elements. So all of these three compositions use the same stuff, guy, sun, bushes, and tree, but it's just arranged differently within that composition. So that's kind of what you'll be doing for your thumbnails, playing around with these different sorts of compositions. You'll look at them, I'll look at them, and we'll be like, okay, I really like this one because your focal point's still a little larger, but you still get some background shapes in there. And it should work out that way. But usually symmetrical ones here feels more organized. People kind of like to set up things symmetrically, but then it can also feel a little rigid. It can feel staged. Rule of thirds feels a little more natural. Allows you to play with the background more. But both are good. So I suggest when you're working on your thumbnails or any project in the future to try both symmetrical and rule of thirds, because you're not going to know which one of these you really like or which one is working until you sketch it out. Okay. So have you guys noticed, have you seen on your iPhone cameras, usually when you open the camera app, there's a little grid on your phone that has on top of your phone with the rule of thirds right on there. Has anyone seen that on their camera before? So that's what it's used for. When you open up the camera app, it has those little grid lines on there to just basically make everyone into an expert photographer. So you can use those lines now as you work. So let's just do another example here. And basically just seeing that you can take the same elements, same shapes, and put them on a third or on a symmetrical. So let's just make our focal point a sailboat here. So this one, we'll put the sailboat here right in the middle. And here we could put our boat any one of these 4 places right there. Let's try it down on this one. Okay, another thing that this rule of thirds is good for keep your focal point away from the edge of the composition. So all this space around here, it's kind of like the margins of your paper that you write on. Nothing important should go too close to the edge. And so this rule of thirds is nice in that way because you do not want your focal point you don't want your focal point way down right there. Okay, so you don't want anything important in your composition too close to the edge. So putting your focal point on a third forces it to be away from the edge, which is good. So now I can start to fill up this composition with the rest of the stuff. Put our little horizon line back here. Some rocks in the foreground. Clouds, texture in the water. I can do the same thing here. So just filling it up. So this time I'm going to put the horizon line right on that third. So you don't always have to think about it as dividing up the, just putting the focal point on the third, but other elements as well. So if I would put a sun there, I would put the sun on that third. So I put in these clouds, see, it's okay for these clouds to be near the margins or the edge. But I don't want the focal point to be there. So again, you want to try both of these different types of compositions for your thumbnails. Try some symmetrical, try some using the rule of thirds. And from there, see, I could do a different one where I just take the boat here, move it over to this third, or up to this third, or up to that third. So if you're having trouble coming up with different compositions, I know some people can just have trouble generating ideas for their thumbnails. Using that rule of thirds and just kind of moving the focal point around from third to the different thirds to symmetrical can generate a bunch of different ideas for your focal point or for your thumbnails. I can also, change the shape of the frame and then do the rule of thirds this way. So maybe I want my sailboat up here. And also making the focal point larger or smaller is a good way to get variety also. So even though all these thumbnails are, have the same stuff in it, water, mountains, sailboat, all of these would count as a different thumbnail for your project because they're all different varieties using different compositional rules and just moving that focal point around. So yeah, I do want to see some of these little guidelines drawn on your thumbnails. So I will be looking for that to see that you're trying those different sorts of compositions. Okay, any questions there on the rule of thirds or symmetrical compositions? All right, we will talk about this more as the quarter goes on, but this first project, I want to see you guys trying to work with this, trying to kind of get a handle on these different sorts of compositions. All right. right, here's another topic that we will introduce today, but we will talk about a lot the rest of the quarter. Value contrast. So we've been talking about value in this class, light values, dark values, medium values. But value contrast is a very important concept that allows your focal point to stand out clearly, okay? So I want you guys all in your sketchbooks right now, or whatever you have for taking notes. So we're gonna draw a quick little value scale. So I want you to draw 5 boxes in a row. They can just be an inch or two tall. Five. Has anyone made a value scale in other drawing classes? Usually you do it in like a still life drawing class or something like that. Oftentimes a charcoal. Yeah, so it's a really good exercise to do. Usually you do it with whatever medium you're going to be drawing with. So if you guys have a pen you're drawing with now that you've used for your thumbnails, or a pencil that you use, it's good to create a value scale with whatever that medium is. So here I'm drawing digitally, so I'm going to create a digital sketch of a value scale here. We just basically go by percentages here, and this is a simplified one. This only has 5 steps in it, but that'll usually work for what we need. You can do one with a whole, 15 steps in it where you just very, very slowly fade from white to black. 25, 50, 75, 100. So 100 is going to be 100% solid black there. And 0 will be pure white. Oh yeah, using acrylic paint is a good way to do it, especially if you're going to be painting in acrylic. So try and do this. Just take a minute here and try and make this value scale slowly fade from one value to the next with whatever medium you have there for drawing. Try and get that smooth transition from light to dark. So if if you're drawing with a pen, you may be creating these dark values differently. Maybe you have to do hatching like this. If you're doing it with pencil, you might have to like push down really hard or push down softer to get light and dark values. Just take a minute and create your own version of that value scale. What I also like about this one is just having numbers to represent these values. So sometimes we can use this in critiques to talk about your values. I say, oh, that background's 50 right now, but I think it'll look better as a 25% value. Or your focal point's only 25. If it was pure white, that would work better. So, and it also can kind of help for people that have a little more analytical mind and think in numbers a little bit more. It can work that way. All right. So I'm going to fill in this composition. So you guys can keep working on your value scale if you still got it going. So I'm just filling in this abstract composition right now with, I started with a 50% gray, 50% value. And now I'm making all these shapes 75. So I want to make this shape right here stand out as the focal point. So how do I do that? I'm going to use value contrast to make it stand out. And that's basically the idea that the human eye will go to the area of highest contrast first. So where there's the lightest value next to the darkest value. And if they're touching, that creates contrast, and that will draw the human eye towards that section of your composition. And we will basically use that to make your focal point stand out. So I'm going to start out with this shape right here. I want to make this one really dark. Okay, so now this darkest shape right now, this is standing out as the focal point. Okay, but I want to make it more clear. So maybe I want another dark shape over here. Maybe I want this shape dark also, or this shape. So how can I draw your guys' eyes as you're looking at it to this shape specifically? Well, I want to use value contrast for that. So what I want to do is this shape right here. What value should I make this shape right here, right next to that really dark shape? Need to increase the value contrast. So I'm just going to make it a lighter value. So now we have good value contrast between these two shapes. So the eye, as someone looking at that, is going to look right there to that shape. I could even make that one lighter. So wherever that bright white against the bright or the dark black is touching within a composition, that is where our eye is going to go. So we see the difference in value here from 100 to 0. That's 100% difference there. So that really allows us to get value contrast in this very simple abstract composition between light and dark. So what I'm going to be looking for in your guys' thumbnails is, are you using value contrast to make a focal point stand out? So that's something I do want to see as you're working on your thumbnails. And you're not always able to get the most value contrast in a thumbnail, because thumbnails are simplified and things like that. But I will make suggestions, and I want to see that you're starting to think about where to get that value contrast in. Can also work for light and dark shapes as well. So if you have a overall kind of a dark composition here, so I can make this shape here pure white. Now that stands out in this dark composition. If I have this shape up here, if I want this to be a light shape, I don't want it to be as light. So this can be lighter, but not as light. So now this bright white shape here, has the most value contrast in there. What I might even suggest, maybe you put like a black dot right in there. So then that gets white against black against dark value there for the background. Any questions so far on this? Okay, let's do one more example together. All right. So oftentimes when if it's possible, it's not possible with all mediums. I like to kind of just start with a middle value. If you're drawing with pencil, sometimes I'll just put down a light shading of pencil over everything. Then I'll make some things darker and some things lighter. If you're drawing with pen, that's not really possible, but you can still kind of think about it that way. All right, so I want the bat here to be my focal point. What value, what percentage on that value scale should I make the bat? Yes, 100% black. Exactly. I'm going to go really close to 100. I'm going to go at like 90, 95, because I want that solid black line work to still show. I'll put some 100% black shadows right on there too. So kind of right here on the body. Maybe make this silhouette shape a little more interesting, extend these ears up. There we go. Okay. So we got 100% for the bat. What percentage should I do for the moon behind the bat? Zero to 5, yeah. So we want a lot of contrast there on the focal point. Very, very light, exactly. So you'll see, and I use it a lot, and basically because I've seen a bunch of artists do it all the time. Lots of people use the moon or like clouds as a kind of a light frame to put behind your focal point. So it's a nice way to think about what can I put behind this focal point or on this focal point to make it stand out. I could also come in and put some bright white, maybe see little eyes, maybe, huh? Some little eyes right there. So then we can get some bright white on there as well. So now I have some bright, so it goes light eyes, super dark bat, light moon. So now the rest of this composition is not quite done. It needs a few more values in here to finish it off. So usually you want to use a full range of values. So that value scale we made, you want to use 0 to 100 somewhere in the composition, okay? So right now we only have very light, very dark, and then a medium. So what color should I make or what value, sorry, should I make these bushes kind of in the foreground or the tops of these trees? Yeah, let's try 75. So we want it kind of dark. That'll kind of create, creepy mood to go with what's going on here. We're at nighttime anyway. There we go. Then how about these clouds here in the sky? What percentage should we do? Try for that? Yeah, 10, 20. Let's try somewhere. Yeah, a lighter-ish value. Let's try just a little darker. See, so as I put in this value right here, I'm worried that's just a little too bright. I don't want to take away from the brightness of the moon there. So I'm going to darken those clouds just a little bit. Go closer to like a 35 or 40. There. I think this knocks them back enough so they're not getting too much attention. There we go. All right. So usually I say you want that darkest black value right here on your focal point. That's where that is. I can also come in here and put some black shadows in these trees. That can kind of help fill it in as well. Now what I like to do is come in and see the difference of values in here and kind of do a little check to make sure everything's working. To make sure my highest area of contrast. So first I see, do I have my full range of value? Good, I got some 0 in here, got some 100, got a little 100 down here, got 75, got like a 30 and a 50. So I can kind of count all my value ranges there. So I can count from 0 up to 100. I have a little bit of every part of the value. So that's kind of a check you can do with your own work. And then you want to check the contrast. Okay, so I have 0 next to 100 right here. So that's 100% difference there. So that's best on my focal point. Here we got 75 against 100. Oh, well, that's only a 25% difference. So that's okay. Here we got 50 of the sky against that 30 of the clouds. So that's a 20% difference. So wherever the biggest contrast is and the difference in those values right next to each other, that's what will draw the eye. And that's what will stand out to the viewer. So as we looked at those projects here, here's an example of having the darkest value against the lightest value. Darkest value here, I just would have made, right now, these towers look like they're about an 80% black. I would have made those 100 against the bright white sky. So back to Megan's, since this one is her strongest, the focal point of those eyes right there on the face. So bright white eyes against the dark shape of the head there creates really good value contrast. Check out this one. So here, this building right here is the focal point. So really dark building and bright white on it becomes the highest area of value contrast. So here's a nice abstract one. So the darkest shape against the brightest white shape. Darkest black shape here for the focal point, and then using the moon shape behind to create dark against light for that value contrast. And yeah, you're not going to be able to get the full range of value contrast on your thumbnails. I don't expect you to have like the full range of values and the super dark black against the super dark light. But I want to at least start to see where you're thinking about it. Where can you put those dark values against light values? How can you start to think about that in your thumbnails? So when you come in and start working in Illustrator, you kind of have that idea of where those light and dark values will go laid out. Any questions about value contrast? And how to use that in your thumbnail sketches or your final art? Okay, cool. So we'll talk about that a lot more as the class goes on here. Let me show you guys just a couple of rule of third examples. All right. So I found a cool blog one time that had a bunch of art concepts and using the Incredibles as an example to illustrate those different art concepts. So here's the rule of thirds. So as you can see, here's the focal point right there on this third. So we got the thirds that come down here. So this creates a nice space for the gaze to go. Creates all this nice empty space here and gets the focal point out of the center of the composition. But remember, you don't want that focal point right along the edge. If it was cropped like that, it would feel very cramped, very awkward, and like the character's butting their head against the side of the composition. So don't put anything important along the edge. That is going to be definitely something I'm looking for. And just rely on those thirds to put your focal point. Here's another nice one. This one is by Howard Pyle, illustrator. So here's our focal point. We can see the thirds. Here's a third down here, third there, and third there. These are not mathematical thirds. I'm not ever going to like take a ruler out to your artwork and divide it by 3 and make sure things are exactly on the third. It's getting a general idea of it. But this is a nice way to divide the space using the rule of thirds. So you have a nice division of space. So 1/3 up here, 1/3 sky, and 2/3 ground. So you decide what you want to dominate the composition. So this artist chose to have the ground take up more space. So it just depends on what you want to focus more. This artist probably tried both in some thumbnail sketches and decided on that final composition. Here's a symmetrical composition. So this one's divided right down the center. So it has kind of a very organized feel, kind of an architectural feel to it. Oftentimes it can have like a religious or government feel to it. So it's good to try both. So this one works, and this also feels staged. It's not like an actual moment from the story. It's kind of a stage way to present this character in this image. The focal point right there in the middle, and everything else is built symmetrically. So this image here, that focal point is the house. This one is the opposite. So this one has 1/3 ground and 2/3 sky. So this one chose to have the sky dominate the composition rather than the ground. Even though they're using that rule of thirds, and they still get kind of leading lines coming in here. And things like that. Okay, so it's going to be a lot we've gone over the last few weeks from, line quality, leading lines, value contrast, rule of thirds, but I want to see you start to work all these different things we've talked about into your compositions there. All right. So that will be it for today in terms of new information. So yeah, no live lecture next week. I'll just have your thumbnail sketches due on the 20th. So when we would normally have class, and I will go in and offer advice, critiques, suggestions, and help you choose which thumbnails are working the best. You guys can look at each other's work, offer comments on each other's work, ask questions. And then the project will be due on the 25th. So kind of a week and a half from today. Yeah, I went through some of the drawing challenges from yesterday and got some of them graded, and I'll probably finish them up, the rest of them up today. So yeah, I enjoyed looking at those, and that will kind of just, you know, get the ball rolling on drawing the thumbnails for the next project. All right, guys, that's it. Let me know if you have questions before you log off. Other than that, feel free to come by lab hours if you have questions, and I will look for your work in the critique and look for an email from me later today or tomorrow, kind of overviewing where to submit your thumbnails and things like that.